We are going to go for a little bit of a journey through Pittsburgh's past to the present, and then hopefully where the future will be headed. But we're going to be guided along this journey by the after effects of NyQuil. So I went to Boston this week, and I came back with an amazing head cold that caused me to stay awake all Wednesday night, and I refused to do that again tonight. So last night at 11 o'clock, I succumbed to the green monster in the closet and took a shot and a half, because you don't just take the recommended dose of NyQuil. You always have to go a half, because you figure out what else. And so today, this morning, there might be a little bit of discombobulation between one thought and the next. And the third, my gosh, what a great group. When Kate said this, I thought, yeah, I'll do that. Sounds nice. Have some toast, drink some coffee, hang out with about 20 people and talk about Pittsburgh. I never expected that it would be this large of a group, this diverse of a group, or so many people. And I went through the guests, the people that RSVP'd list, that are making a difference in this city. This is why we are at the point where we say maybe someday in Pittsburgh. It is here, it's happening right now, and it's only going to get exponentially more and more each year. And we have to be able to harness that in a way that will push us into a really great direction. And unlike any other city on earth, not in this country, on earth, Pittsburgh's poised to be that great city. So let's go back. And when freedom comes to me, I think about freedom under the auspices of the speeches that I give and which speech it fits under. So it may not be under the full definition of freedom, and I may not be talking about the Patriot Act and a couple of other things that have come up through this city's history as well. But what I want to talk about is the freedom to be resilient. The freedom to identify yourself as how you want to be and where you want to see yourself be. And the freedom to understand that you are not shackled to the past, but you have the ability to learn from the past to destine your own future. And why is that? Because cities are like people. They are resilient. They can change, and they do change. They can survive and come back from near-death experiences. Throughout history, cities have been flooded. Cities have been burned to the ground. Cities have been bombed. Cities have had their economic hearts ripped out of them. But cities have had ability to come back, re-identify themselves, and become something else. Go back in this city's history. And how many people have heard me speak in the past 2 months? Okay, you can leave now. Because I've really gotten this speech part down right. You go back to the 1750s, and who's here? You know, the Native Americans are here, and why are they here? Because of the rivers, because it's always been about the water. It's always been about the rivers. That's what Pittsburgh is always about. That's why we're here. And they were here for the protein of the fish and the access to get from one point to another point. And along come the French, and they said, hello, we are here, and this is as far as the New World will go. And that was it. It was Pittsburgh. We were the western frontier. We were Fort Duquesne. We were the forks of the Ohio. Nowhere further west. This was it. This was the New World. And then along came a major in the Virginia militia, and he came marching over the Laurel Highlands from D.C. He started surveying ways to get from Ligonier down to the point, created something called Penn Avenue with his surveying, and his name was George Washington. And George came down. That's a true story, by the way. George Washington surveyed Penn Avenue, so if you're ever mad about the potholes, don't call me. It's George's fault. He came down and he said, hey, not so fast. We want this land. And between the British and the French, they loved us so much, they fought the First World War over us. A war that in Europe is called the 7 Years' War. A war in the United States called the French and Indian War that was fought in Asia and in Europe and in North America all simultaneously. And eventually the British won. I don't know which battles or wars they won, but they won us. And we became Pittsburgh. We were Pittsburgh. You ever wonder why we have the H at the end? Because we were Pittsburgh with the old Scottish spelling of borough. And Pittsburgh was named after William Pitt, who was the Prime Minister of England. and the British set up a fort here. And again, we were still this fort town. And we remained that fort town throughout about 60 years. And after the Revolutionary War and into the 19th century, a couple of guys came to Pittsburgh to have them build a boat, because we built things in Pittsburgh. And they put in right down the river, right down past Heinz Field. Their names were Lewis and Clark. And they started out and they discovered Ohio. So all of a sudden now, we weren't the western frontier. There was this place a little bit further west, and people said, hey, who's going to build this place further west? And they all looked back over their shoulder and they said, Pittsburgh. And so we started out. First it was glass, and then it was iron, and then it was steel, and then it was aluminum. And we built this country. We went from being that little frontier town to understanding our transition, and our resiliency was to becoming a manufacturing center. And we used those rivers, not for the fish that were in them, but for the transportation routes. And industrialists like Andrew Carnegie built out rails and river routes, because really the economy was based on getting product to market. And Pittsburgh was poised because of where we were to be able to do it. They built out systems to be able to get the iron ore from Wisconsin and Michigan in to mix with the coal from West Virginia to be able to produce the steel. And then they used innovation, because it wasn't really steel that we were producing, but it was the Bessemer process and the innovation of how we were able to produce it that made us a global leader. A global leader where 40% of all the steel on Earth, 40% was produced right here. And so we became this universal leader in manufacturing. And America would go and further expand and further expand. And it was from Pittsburgh that they built their bridges and they built their skyscrapers. And we literally built America. But along the way, there were some bumps in the road, because we had created air that was dangerous to breathe. We created water that was toxic to drink. And we created the greatest disparity between the haves who owned and managed the mills and the mines, and the have-nots, those like my grandfather who came here to work there. And so we had to do something else. We had to be able to address the issues, then solve them, because that's what Pittsburghers do. There was no putting it under the carpet or asking somebody else to solve it for us. We had to figure out ways to be able to make sure that the quality of the life here met the prosperity of the wealth here. And so we had leaders like David Lawrence, the mayor of Pittsburgh, who proposed the first Clean Air Act in the country. 20 years before Congress would ever take it up, David Lawrence banned coal-burning furnaces within the homes of the city residents. Almost got him thrown out of office, but he would go on to become the governor and have the largest green convention center in the world named after him. We had leaders like Rachel Carson, went to Chatham University, a gal from right up the Allegheny Valley in Springdale, who marched up the steps of Congress and taught us about the danger of toxicity within our water and the need to clean it up. Those people, Rachel Carson, David Lawrence, are the giants whose shoulders we stand on, the same way that we would as we look at people like Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick. And by the way, I had an opportunity to speak at Carnegie Mellon on Saturday, and I was explaining to the students how important it was that industrialists like Andrew Mellon and Andrew Carnegie invested in the community. And I also mentioned that I was very happy that Henry Clay Frick never invested in their university. And they were wondering why, and I said, otherwise your school would be known as Carnegie Frick and Mellon. Which would probably not be a good thing. So anyway, so we get to this point, and we're realizing now, we have David Lawrence cleaning the water, and it becomes the focus. He creates the URA, he creates the Allegheny Conference, he creates this whole new partnership between government and city. And what he's looking at is, we knew that we were at this one point, that we were a fortress town that changed into this industrial giant, but we're not going to be able to sustain ourselves with this. We have to create a whole new system. And what he built was the Renaissance. But at the same time, there were people like my grandfather who had a second-grade education, who were working in a mill, who were only being asked to work whenever there was an order, who couldn't be able to keep their families or their homes. And they fought in order to create the United Steelworkers, in order to make sure that working hard proved to be a benefit, that you could join the middle class. And in places like Pittsburgh and in Chicago and in Detroit and in Buffalo, the middle class was born through this as well. And so we take all of this that we learned, and Lawrence also had this grand vision of how we should redevelop urban areas. And right in the area that we sit, they went through the area right above us with a wrecking ball. There used to be a beautiful market house that was right up the street. We tore it down to build a shopping mall, literally a shopping mall. The Hill District that connected to downtown, we tore it out in order to build an arena. East Liberty, we tore out about 40% of the buildings and we built a road around it, because in the 40s and the 50s, urban planners saw as their vision the automobile as the central focus, and that the cities would have to adapt to be able to fit into the future, and their idea of the future was based around the automobile. So the Renaissance brought us great things, a focus on cleaning the air, a focus on cleaning the water, a focus on lifting up those to be able to join the middle class if you worked hard and you dedicated yourself. But it also brought us the urban renewal process that tore the heart out of the city when it came to redevelopment within our neighborhoods. It also focused it in on how to get away from the city. So our investment dollars went to big projects, new tunnels, new bridges, new driveways, basically to see sprawl increase. So in 1945, after the war ended, we had 1.2 million people in Allegheny County, and 78% of them lived in the city of Pittsburgh. Today, we have 1.2 million people in Allegheny County, yet only 27% of them live in the city of Pittsburgh. And they're all spread out throughout this county. And at the same time, we had to build roads, we had to build sewer systems, and we had to build all this infrastructure around it. And people wonder, why are my taxes so high? Well, you can't just roll up the streets in Braddock and put them away or close down the sewer system. You have to keep and maintain those systems while you're building more and more systems. So we have all this sprawled out development, and that was really the focus over the past with the Renaissance. So that system continues. And what do we invest in? We invest in big things like a new airport, a new convention center. We built a new stadium. And then we tore that down to build a new airport, a new convention center, a new stadium. And it was an inward focus. And we started to understand that, you know, this process was being fueled by the prosperity of our mills and our industry. But then came 1979. And that's a great year for me because I started high school at Chartiers Valley. And the Pirates won the World Series with Willie Stargell. And the Steelers won the Super Bowl with Terry Bradshaw, their 4th Super Bowl. And Pittsburgh died. It died. The mills closed. One by one, I watched as friends, families had to leave this city. Everyone thought, well, they'll reopen. They'll reopen. We've gone through this before. Give it a couple years. Give it a few months. Give it a few more years. Every politician in the 80s ran on the platform of how they were going to reopen the mills. And that went on for almost a decade of denial that, you know, this really was an end. It couldn't end. How could it end? The mills can't leave. They didn't realize that generationally things do change and that you have to change as well. Fortunately, there were some within this region that did see that. And they had to talk in hushed tones because saying that you were looking at something other than reopening the mills was basically slander. People like Dick Seiert at Carnegie Mellon University, Henry Posner at the University of Pittsburgh put together a report in the early 80s that said what we need to do is become one of the first cities in the country to create a supercomputing center. We have to start looking at life sciences, which will be an industry that will grow in the future, and figure out how we can use our medical centers in order to get research dollars. And they started planting these different little seeds of where we could be strategic. And we did, and we invested, and it happened. But it wasn't taking root. It was just at the very early stages. And then in late 80s, Dr. Moravian from Carnegie Mellon put out the Moravian report, and he focused in on the industry clusters that would make us competitive, adding into it robotics. And the thing about it, back at that time, there was no such term, industry clusters. We were sort of inventing it as we were going along. And the 80s were rough, there's no doubt about it. We had unemployment that was higher than the unemployment in Detroit is today. We had, and we still have, a debt within our city budget that is higher than New York City's was when they went bankrupt. And we lost more people than New Orleans lost after Katrina. But there was no federal bailout for us. There was no help coming from the state. There was no assistance of anything. We did what Pittsburghers know to do. You brush yourself off, you get to work, and you solve the problem. And it took 30 years, and now we're there. From that little frontier town to the industrial giant, to the trials and tribulations, the successes and the failures of the Renaissance, we are now at that next phase. And that next phase is a blank slate of paper. We know what we can learn from each of the 3 previous phases of this city. We know that Carnegie built his industries out on creating systems that would get product to market. But the future is going to be based on how you get people to workplace, which means the investments we made on river and rail transportation now have to be made in public transit to get people to anywhere they need to be instantly and easily throughout Allegheny County. We realize that the fight that David Lawrence started on cleaning the air and cleaning the water is not nearly done. That we have so much more that we have to do, because those are the cornerstones that you build an economic development strategy around. And when I met with Andrew Moore, who was the person that brought Google to Pittsburgh, all he had to do was say an easy word, yes, when Google offered him a position to move to Silicon Valley. He said, no, I want to stay in Pittsburgh. And so they moved Google to Pittsburgh. And when I asked him, what is it that you need? What can I do for you? And I expected free parking or lower my taxes. He said, and I don't know if Andrew's Scottish, British, Welsh, or Irish, he said, clean your air and clean your water. And he said that is the biggest detriment that he has in getting 30-somethings to move here from around the world. It's not the tax rates. It's not any of the issues that people fight over. It is that when people who are applying for Google, probably Google Pittsburgh, they find that our air quality and our water quality is not that great. So we have to continually work to make sure that that's part of it. And we have to create a city that is a welcoming city for all, that provides opportunity for all. Just like my grandfather had that opportunity to use his skills, which were his arms and his backs, we have to train a workforce to be able to use their minds, and we have to make sure that those that are the lowest paid are able to join a middle class. It means that the focus of changing to a service industry shouldn't be lost because we went from an industrial industry for those like my grandfather who fought to be able to build a middle class. If you work 40 hours a week, you should not have to be in poverty. And you shouldn't have to be looking for a second job to be able to do it, because all that's happening then is those companies are putting that cost onto the public for public assistance for housing, public assistance for transportation, public assistance for food. And we have to build up a skilled workforce to be able to give them the training in order to be able to break that and to break that opportunity and those shackles that are holding people down. That's the lessons of our past, but they were all the lessons that built Pittsburgh. They were all the different parts of it that have helped to make it where we're at today. You know, when I see Pittsburgh, I see it, and I just came back from Boston, hence the NyQuil because of a head cold that I got while I was there. But we had a conference called Legacy Cities, and there were 6 mayors from 6. We're no longer Rust Belt, by the way. We're Legacy. You know, I throw out Rust Belt because I love it. I think there's a urban hip chicness to the term Rust Belt, and I really do. And I think that people gravitate toward that because in some people's mind it's like a dirty rust. The others, it's like this, yeah, that's us. So I call it Rust Belt, but they call it Legacy Cities. So we're all discussing our cities, and they're all the exact same story. New economy, new prosperity, new development occurring. A whole other section of the city, 30%, 40%, depends on you're talking to Cleveland or St. Louis, with no ladder of opportunity to join it. And you have these areas that have been left behind that have not had any opportunity to be a part of redeveloping it. So what we've done in the mayor's office is we've created a new bureau. And right now they're on a retreat all day with a foundation community to really figure out how we're going to make this so that it really does succeed. It's called the Bureau of Neighborhood Empowerment. And it doesn't look to create a whole new level of government. What it does is empowers those on the ground, those that are in the forefront of fighting to try and get ladders of opportunity between the communities that haven't seen it into that opportunity for a new economy. Key of it all, long-term solution, is education. So we brought Dr. Curtis Porter, the former chancellor of Penn State Allegheny, to head this part. And you know, I don't have a role in education. We have a superintendent, we have a school board, they're independent. But the moment that I give up fighting for education is the moment that I give up on the city's future. And it means that every kid gets an opportunity to start out the gate equal, and that we fight to make sure that there's opportunities for them along the way, because that is going to be the cycle that breaks, or the opportunity that breaks cycles of poverty. Number 2 is housing. And we're going to change the focus of housing away from working with big developers that come from out of state, that build these big apartments that just house poverty, and they take vouchers and they figure out how much drywall they have to spend in order to use these areas like an ATM. And we're going to empower nonprofits and faith-based organizations on the ground to start taking the homes that are already there. The homes that were built in Homewood were built the same time as the ones in Squirrel Hill and Point Breeze. And what we're doing is we're going down with that David Lawrence philosophy and knocking them down and then building crap that we have to tear down in 30 years because they're falling over. Instead, we're going to hire people from community to help to restore them, learn a skill, whether it's roofing, plumbing, electrician, drywall, whatever the different parts are, and then use that voucher as an opportunity to get equity with a rent-to-own program and start to redevelop the communities from within. Third thing, neighborhood business districts and entrepreneurism. A lot of people would like to be able to start their own business, but they don't know how. We've got tons of property. One of the great things about Pittsburgh is no matter what business district or no matter what neighborhood you live in, your business district's pretty much intact. We didn't demolish a lot of it. Even like Homewood Avenue still has a lot of the buildings that are still there. And we want to do is fix them up and then offer them for free or very, very discounted rent. So whether you're a software engineer from Carnegie Mellon or the guy that works at Pep Boys who wants to open his own transmission shop, we want to give entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs, the opportunity to start their businesses in Pittsburgh and then redevelop neighborhood business districts as a part of it. And the fourth and the most critical part, nonprofits and faith-based communities, because they are the glue that gets all of this done. They're the ones that are in the neighborhoods right now fighting to get the changes to happen. What they need to do is what we need to do is empower them to be able to do more in those 3 critical areas. And that's the difference. That's the difference between the model of building new bridges and tunnels to take people out and a model of investing within to build up the city. Now I could put this phone in the mayor's office chair and leave for the next 4 years and go sell scooters or rent scooters in some beach in Mexico, which sounds kind of nice right now. Shady Side's going to do great. Oakland will do well. Squirrel Hill will do great. Lawrenceville will do well. Polish Hill's going to come, you know, the prices are going up there. It's going to do well. Strip District, South Side, you know, you name it. You know the neighborhoods. They're going to do great. And it's sort of like almost on an automatic pilot. Our goal with those neighborhoods is to not be the brake that stops development from happening, but help to spur that development that will occur. And that's good. I mean, that we are, and this is why we get written about all over the country because of what's happening there. But if I don't take care of Hazelwood and Homewood, Hill District, and I don't start looking to find development for Sheridan and the hilltop communities, and down here in Chateau and Manchester, then we will have failed to see that great opportunity of what this city could be. That is the difference between the renaissance of David Lawrence and whatever it is that we're going to call this next Pittsburgh. Because this next Pittsburgh is going to be about rebuilding up and in. We have a goal of creating 20,000 new residents in the city in the next 10 years. And in times, I think that that's a really low number. I was with a developer just 2 weeks ago, and he sat with me at right next to Ritter's. And we broke ground on a hotel. And we already are talking to him on our hotel. Most people are trying to develop a hotel. On a new apartment building. We talked to him about 3 more apartment buildings that we have that we want to work with him to develop in the next year. And it may be a very strong reality. And he said to me, I heard your quote about 20,000 new residents. Put me down for 10%. And I hear this often, that you know the number that we will get to within the city will exceed that 20,000 goal. And I believe it. But it's the question of how we develop it, how we make a model that isn't like San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, or New York with growth cities, where it comes as exclusionary, where certain people are forced out, and how we make it a home for everyone. How we take those lessons of that little fortress town, how we take the lessons learned through the industrial age, how we take the lessons learned through the Renaissance, and use all of those to build the next Pittsburgh. I've traveled a bit, and I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people. And between what we have with the vast amount of real estate on riverfront, the vast opportunities to redevelop neighborhoods, the research facilities, especially Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh, the workforce, the topography, everything about this city, people around the country and those around the world will say, this city is poised to be the next great city. For so long, we've set our sights on just being a great post-industrial city. That's no longer the case. Our job now is to become the model city for the 21st century. We're large enough that the world's noticing. We're small enough that we can actually do it. So over the course of these next 4 years, our goal is to hit on different benchmarks to make sure that we're getting there. And that will only happen through a combination of working together, much like David Lawrence did back in the day, changing the model from this top-down design to one that's more community-oriented, and making sure that we're investing in areas where we haven't invested before. So as that tide rises, all boats will be lifted. So that's the goal of this next Pittsburgh.